I've read the official file more times than I can count. It says our patrol in late autumn of 1960 suffered a navigation error, a fall on wet rock, and some bad luck with a cougar. One man listed as missing, one listed as killed by accident. The rest of us marked as scratched up and tired. That is the record they kept. The truth sits in my mind in a straighter line. We were a small recon team out in the Ozark training area, close to the Missouri and Arkansas line, checking on a quiet radio relay shack. Night settled hard on the ridge, the kind of cold that holds your breath in one place. We formed a tight perimeter around that little wooden structure, watching the trees through dim red light. The first howl rose just before our next radio check. Long, layered, almost shaped like a voice trying to sound like something else. The forest around us felt empty in an instant. Before we start the video, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. It only takes a second. I was a staff sergeant at Fort Leonard Wood in late 1960, part of a small recon platoon that spent most weeks walking hills, checking compass work, and keeping new lieutenants out of trouble. My name was Tom Riker. By then I had already done my time in Korea, and I had learned how fast things go wrong when men trust paper more than ground. The Ozark Hills around the post trained that lesson deeper. They were full of steep draws, slick rock, and thick woods that hid sound in strange ways. Most days we treated it as good practice. Some days I felt the land watching back. Our platoon followed a steady rhythm: long marches, map drills, radio checks, and weeks of cold rain that turned dirt into clay. We slept in damp tents, woke up before first light, and kept walking until our legs felt hollow. It was a simple life with simple rules. Stay quiet. Stay sharp. Know where you are even when the map and the ground do not agree. I never thought much of the old stories men told in the barracks. Most were jokes to pass time, meant to scare new soldiers, nothing more. That changed slowly, without any one moment to point at. Some training sectors on our maps were marked with a faint circle or a faded stamp that said no movement allowed. Officers never explained why, they just told us to stay out. The one that stood out most sat deep in the woods, shaped like a crooked bowl in the land. Men called it Devil's Fork Hollow. No one joked about that one. When someone mentioned it, the talk died fast. I had spent enough years in uniform to know that when soldiers will not speak about a place, it means they saw something they could not explain or they lost someone there. Both reasons lead to silence. We got our orders for the 3-day recon on a cold morning with low clouds. A few leaves still clung to the trees, but most were underfoot, hiding the mud. Battalion told us the mission was a simple navigation test, with a stop at a radio relay shack that sat near the off-limits hollow. The shack had gone quiet. No scheduled test beacon, no routine check tone. They wanted us to look at it, write down the condition of the mast, then move north to a hilltop for pickup. The lieutenant, Mark Henson, repeated the plan twice like he had to pass an exam on it. He wanted a clean report more than anything. Our team was small, 6 men. Enough to move quiet, but not enough to fight and win a long battle. Henson was young, smart, too focused on rules. I was there to keep him alive. Sergeant Eddie Cole carried the radio and the folded maps. He had the steady hands of someone who knew how bad it felt when comms went dark. Corporal Jim Mac McAllister was our best shot, calm but sharp-eyed. Private Danny Price was fresh, eager to prove himself. Private Briggs was strong and quiet, the one with the BAR across his chest. Good group. I trusted them. I still do. We stepped off at first light. The air held a cold bite and our breath hung above the ground. We walked ridge to ridge with good spacing, rifles slung, boots sinking into soft leaf piles. The first hours felt normal. Just another march through rolling hills, thick oak and hickory stands, and narrow creeks that ran clear and cold. The kind of land that seems calm until it reminds you how old it is. You can feel age there. Not in years, but in the way sounds fade too soon under the trees. As we moved deeper, I kept an eye on the map. The relay shack sat close to the marked no-go area. We were not supposed to step into the hollow itself, only move along its edge. Still, the line on the map had a weight to it. Men do not draw warnings without a reason. Cole noticed the same thing. During our first radio check, he frowned, saying the signal carried a faint hiss he had never heard on that channel. Thought it might be the hills. Thought it might be the weather. But he said it in a way that showed he did not believe his own words. By midday, the forest sounds began to thin. At first, it felt like coincidence. By late afternoon, the silence pressed harder. No crows. No small rustle of ground birds. No distant cry of coyotes. Just our breath and our boots and the soft click of gears shifting on straps. Price kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to follow us. Max said nothing, but he scanned the trees more often than usual. The change was slow enough to ignore for a while, but steady enough that, by the time we reached the old boundary signs, the silence felt like a warning. The signs were wood, weathered and soft at the corners, with faded letters that were hard to read. Whatever message they once held had been almost eaten by rain in years. Ensign checked his map, told us we were still on the right route, and walked on. I paused for a moment. The land ahead looked the same as any other section of woods, but the air felt heavier. Ridges rose sharper. The afternoon light dimmed faster between the trunks. I could smell damp earth and a faint bitter note I could not name. Not strong, but present in the back of my throat. We kept moving. The last stretch toward the relay shack passed through thicker brush, the kind that slows a man without touching him. Branches leaned inward. Roots hid under leaves. Every step felt like the woods wanted to hold us a little longer. Cole's radio hiss grew softer and louder in uneven waves. He tapped the side of the set more often than needed. Briggs shifted the BAR on his shoulder and scanned the slope. Even Henson's face pulled tight around the edges. When we reached the final ridge before the relay shack, the sky was still bright, but the valley below looked dim as early dusk. A strange shift in light. Like the hollow took in more shadow than it should. I felt the land change under my boots. Not a big change, just enough to raise the hair on my arms. We stepped over the ridge and started down, not knowing we had already walked into something that had been waiting a long time. The slope down from that last ridge felt steeper than it looked on the map. The ground turned harder, shifting from soft leaf beds to patches of bare limestone. The air thinned in a different way, as if something pulled sound out of it. I have walked many hills, and you can sense when a place does not want company. That valley had that feeling. The trees grew closer, their branches reaching over our heads, and the light dimmed even though the sky still held a pale shine. We moved slow around loose rock. A few times Briggs had to grab Price's pack strap to keep him steady. Each ridge-to-ridge stretch felt longer than it should. I kept checking the compass even when I knew our direction was right. Something about the land made distance feel uncertain. Cole called the radio check at the next scheduled time, but the reply came back thin and broken, full of soft static. Not enough to worry Command, but enough to make us look at one another in quiet agreement. The hills were pushing back against our comms. Halfway down the slope, we came across a deer carcass lying beside a fallen log. It had not been there long. The legs were bent the wrong way, as if something had slammed the body sideways. The throat had been torn, not bitten clean like a cougar might do. The strange part was how little meat had been touched. A predator kills to eat. This looked more like something had tested its strength. A faint smell drifted around it, a mix of wet stone and sour animal scent. Not strong, but sharp enough to leave a mark in the nose. Price stepped back from it, eyes wide. Mac crouched and studied the ground without speaking. Henson told us to move on. He did not want the team dwelling on it. But none of us forgot that smell. It stayed in the air for another ridge-to-ridge stretch, then faded slowly as if carried off by a wind we could not feel. The weather shifted while we crossed the next rise. Clouds formed low and fast, and the light flattened until afternoon felt like early evening. I checked my watch twice. The hours did not match the amount of darkness around us. That land played tricks like that. Natural or not, I could not tell. As we reached a narrow clearing between thick oaks, Mac raised a hand and pointed across the slope. Far off, on the next ridge, stood a small cabin with smoke stains above the roof. It looked old, made from rough boards and set back under the shadow of two tall pines. A man stood outside. Hard to judge his age from that distance, but he looked thin and still, like a branch stuck upright. He stared at us for a long moment, not moving. When he realized we were soldiers, he turned around and stepped inside without a wave. I watched the trees near his cabin. Someone had tied small bundles of twigs and string to the branches, hanging at eye height. A few animal skulls rested on the lower limbs, all facing the same direction, away from the hollow. I did not point it out to the others. Some things are better left to quiet minds. We kept moving, and the cabin slipped out of sight. The relay shack sat on a small rise shaped like a shoulder in the land. From a distance it looked simple enough: wooden walls, raised on short stilts, a narrow door, and a tall antenna mast with guy wires holding it steady. Brush around it grew uneven, as if plants near the shack struggled. The ground felt thin under my boots, almost hollow. Nothing a man can see, just something he notices without trying. We walked in a slow circle around the structure. One of the mast supports had deep gouges, long and curved. Not from a tool, not from a knife. The marks were high, about the height of my chest. Mac touched one with his glove and gave me a small nod. Not a good sign. Inside, the place was cold. Dust settled on a folding cot. Someone had left the cup half covered in dried coffee at the edge of a small table. The logbook lay open where the last man had written in it. The early pages held ordinary checks, signal strength, weather notes, equipment tests. The last entries changed tone. The writer mentioned unusual interference and strange noise near the mast. The final line read, "Heard it again tonight." Not coyote, deeper. Cole tested the relay set. It still had power, but the cycle sounded uneven, like it struggled to hold a steady pulse. He shook his head and rubbed his thumb along the side of the radio, listening to the faint buzz under the normal hum. The whole place felt unsettled. When we stepped outside, a soft sound rolled across the trees. It was low, almost like distant wind pushing through a cave. Henson said it might be thunder, but the sky held no storm shape. The sound faded quick, leaving the woods even quieter. The plan had seemed simple earlier in the day: check the shack, then move on. But the light dropped fast in that hollow, far faster than it should at that hour. Henson decided we would stay by the shack for one night to complete tests and write a clear report. We set a tight perimeter around the rise, placing each man where he had some cover and a good view of the tree line. No one argued, but no one liked being still in that place. As dusk slid over the hills, the forest drew back its voice again. Even Price could feel it. We were not just passing through the land anymore. We were inside something's reach, and it was waiting for the dark to settle. Night in the Ozarks comes in layers. First, the trees darken. Then the ground loses shape. Then the cold settles around the ribs. By the time we finished placing each man along the perimeter near the relay shack, the last bit of daylight had faded. We kept our red lens lights low and moved with slow steps. No fire allowed. Only the small stove inside the shack gave a little warmth, and even that seemed to vanish before it reached the door. I took first watch on the southeast side, sitting behind a fallen log with my rifle across my knees. I could see the rise of the next ridge, only a shadow line against the sky. The air felt heavy, almost still. A place that deep should have held at least some hint of life. An owl, a tree frog, a coyote yip. But the woods stayed empty, as if something had cleared the sound out before we arrived. Price sat 20 paces to my left. Briggs covered the slope behind us with the BAR. Cole checked the radio at set times, tapping the handset with 2 fingers each time the hiss rose a little too sharp. Henson and Mac took the opposite side of the perimeter. Even in silence, I could sense a pull among the team, each man listening harder than he wanted to. During the first hour, nothing moved. The only sound came from the faint drip of water falling through cold leaves. The ground held the kind of quiet that makes small noises echo. I kept shifting my eyes across the tree line, careful not to stare too long at one place. Long focus makes shadows play tricks. Then it came. Not loud at first. A low, deep sound, like a heavy animal letting out a slow growl. It rose from somewhere far off, maybe across the next ridge, rolling through the trees like a slow breath. I froze with my hand tight around the rifle grip. The sound lifted higher, then higher again, until it reached a sharp, strange pitch. The tone bent in a way I had never heard from any wild animal. It almost sounded shaped, like something trying to match a voice, but failing in the middle. The howl drifted down the slope for a long moment before fading. No echo, no answer, just silence folding back in. I let out a slow breath. The skin on my arms tightened under my jacket. Cole whispered across the line that no cougar sounded like that. Henson told him to keep his voice down, but his own grip on his rifle was tight enough for me to see it in his posture. Even Briggs shifted his weight and looked toward the sound with careful eyes. A few minutes passed. Then the smell reached us. It came in like a thin ribbon on the wind, faint but sharp. Whetstone, animal musk. A burned powder note that did not belong out there. It passed through the perimeter in slow waves, and each man noticed it at a different moment. Price lifted his head just a little, nostrils flaring. Mac murmured that he picked up something bitter on the air. No one said more. During my second half of the watch, the woods began to move again, but not with normal life. Somewhere upslope, heavy steps pressed into loose rock. Not running, not dragging, steady, purposeful. I raised my rifle and leaned forward slightly. The steps paused. then shifted direction, pressing into another patch of stone. That rock told me wait, a big wait. I signaled to Price to hold still. He nodded once, his face pale, even in the dim red glow. The sound stopped again. For a moment, I could not tell if the thing had moved behind a tree or if it had faded into the land. Then a faint crack came from a branch shifting under pressure, followed by a soft thud of something pushing aside brush. I looked up the slope. A dark shape stood between two thick trunks, tall, too broad for a man, shoulders pushed forward, head low. I caught the brief flash of eyes, reflecting a dull red, when Price's red lens beam swept too far to the side. The shape withdrew into the dark as fast as it had appeared. Not running, just gone from sight. When the watch changed, I told Henson what I saw. He kept his reply short. He wanted to finish the next relay cycle at first light and move out after sunrise. I understood the plan, but I also knew something had marked our perimeter and was studying us. The land felt tighter now. Ridge-to-ridge stretches would not stay simple. Near the middle of the night, a soft scrape came from behind the shack. Briggs raised the BAR and shifted his stance. We waited. Nothing followed. Sometimes the quiet weighs more than the noise. It keeps a man ready without knowing what he is ready for. A little before dawn, something heavy struck the ground near the shack. A rock about the size of a helmet rolled toward the door, not a fall from high ground. This one came with a clean arc and a straight path. A throw. Another landed a short distance away, hitting with a dull thump. Price whispered a shaky question, but Mac cut him off with a quick tap on the arm, eyes fixed ahead. No more rocks came. The woods settled again. The night passed slowly into gray morning. By the time the light grew strong enough to see the ridges around us, each man looked worn. Not from lack of sleep, from waiting, watching something we could not name. The forest did not welcome us the night before. Now it felt like it wanted us to move. And the sooner we left that shack behind, the better our chances would be. Morning light made the relay shack look harmless again, but the ground around it told another story. As soon as we packed our gear, Briggs and I did a slow walk around the rise. Dew still clung to the grass, and that made the tracks easier to see. Some prints looked like a big cat had passed close during the night, but they were too wide. The toe marks stretched longer than they should, and a faint line behind one print looked like it came from claws that barely touched the ground. Briggs knelt beside one of the tracks and ran a finger along the edge. He did not say anything, but the way he looked at me said enough. He had hunted before joining the army. He knew normal sign. We moved out in a loose circle, searching for any trace of the man who had operated the shack. We found nothing that pointed to him. What we found instead sat farther upslope, where the trees broke just enough to show a small clearing with scattered leaves. A deer lay torn open near a split boulder. This one was worse than the one we found the day before. The ribs were cracked wide, almost forced apart. The meat had hardly been touched. A thick scrape in the dirt suggested something strong had dragged the body a short distance before dropping it. The smell there was sharper, almost like wet stone mixed with a sour note that clung to the back of the throat. Max studied the marks on the boulder. Long scratches cut across the surface in uneven lines. Too high for a normal predator to reach without jumping. I watched him run his hand over them. He turned and looked toward the hollow without a word. I did not need him to speak. The marks already said enough. We pushed on. Cole paused every few minutes to test the radio. Some checks came through clean. Then the next would fill with a soft hiss or a broken echo of our own voices. Once, during a test, the static carried a faint pattern that reminded me of the howl from the night before. It lasted only a breath, then vanished. Cole stared at the handset for a long moment afterward. Henson made the call to move toward the extraction hill and not waste more daylight near the shack. I agreed with leaving the area, but the route he chose cut closer to Devil's Fork Hollow. It saved time and distance, but it also pushed us deeper into the land where the silence grew thicker. He wanted us off the map by the end of the next day. He did not want to return to the shack with a poor report. Orders mattered to him. I understood that. I also knew that sometimes the map is not the thing to follow. We stepped into the hollow's edge, and the ground changed again. Moss covered the rocks in a slick layer that made each step careful. Fallen logs blocked the trail in tight bundles. Thick underbrush slowed our pace ridge to ridge. It felt like walking through a place that did not want tracks made in it. Price fell twice, catching himself on roots. Briggs kept reaching back to steady him. The light dimmed even though the sun still sat high above the tree line. Shadows stayed longer on the ground than they should. Wind died out. The air grew still in a way that made breathing feel wrong. We followed a narrow game trail along a slope that curved around a rock wall. The drop beside us was steep, full of broken limbs and dead leaves. I kept my rifle pointed ahead, scanning each gap between trunks. Mac spread out a little above me to watch the higher ground. We were halfway around the bend when the first rock hit. A sharp crash, then a heavy thump. It came from above, too direct to be a slide. I looked up just in time to hear a second rock break loose and fall toward us. Briggs tried to pull Price aside, but the rock bounced and struck Briggs hard on the shoulder. He stumbled, lost his footing, and slid down the slope. We shouted his name as he tumbled through brush and snapped branches. He vanished under a tangle of limbs. Henson tried to move after him, but I grabbed his sleeve and told him to stop. The drop was too steep to rush. We had to go slow or risk losing more men. Then we heard it. A short, sharp cry cut off in the middle, followed by that layered howl rising from the same patch of brush where Briggs had disappeared. The sound held no hurry. It rolled up through the trees, as if whatever made it wanted us to hear it clearly. I led the scramble down. The brush grabbed at my jacket. Loose rocks slid under my boots. When we reached the spot where Briggs had dropped, his BAR lay twisted across a branch, the sling torn. A smear of blood marked a flat stone. Drag marks cut through the leaves toward thicker brush farther downhill. No body. No sign of him moving on his own. Just a broken path that bent into shadow. Henson wanted a full search. He said we could not leave a man behind. I agreed with the reason, but the land around us did not give room for emotion. It was almost midday, and the hollow was already dim. If we stayed long, we would lose the ridge above and all the advantage daylight offered. I told them the truth as straight as I could. A full search with that thing nearby would cost more lives. Briggs was either gone or taken somewhere we would not find before dark. Henson did not like hearing it, but Mac backed me. Even Cole nodded, clutching the radio to his chest. We pulled back upslope. The brush felt thicker with each step. A faint sound drifted from the depth of the hollow. Not a full howl, more like a low hum, as if something in the distance was waiting for us to move again. As we reached safer ground, I knew we had crossed a point we could not walk back from. The land had stopped testing us. Now it was guiding us, ridge to ridge, toward whatever waited deeper ahead. We pushed hard to gain the next ridge, wanting higher ground before the light slipped again. The slope felt twice as long as it should. Each ridge-to-ridge stretch carried a steady pressure, like the land wanted us tired before we reached the top. By the time we stepped onto the narrow trail that followed the ridgeline, every man was breathing harder than he admitted. About halfway along, the trees opened to a clearing with an old fire tower standing on thin metal legs. A small cabin sat beside the base, built from weathered boards. The tower looked abandoned, leaning a little but still solid enough to hold our weight. It was better shelter than anything else nearby. A high position with one ladder to defend, clear sight around. After losing Briggs, that mattered more than anything. Henson agreed, though his face showed strain. Price's empty place in the line and Briggs's absence had put a different weight on him. We walked to the cabin door. The lock hung broken, rust worn into its edges. Inside, dust covered the floor. A bunk sat in one corner. A field telephone bracket hung on the wall without a handset. Someone had left drawers half open, as if they left in a hurry years earlier. I checked the drawers while Mac and Cole inspected windows and corners. The top drawer held nothing but old pens and string. The second drawer was stuck, swollen from damp. I gave it a slow pull. Inside lay a packet of papers tied with twine. The edges had yellowed and some pages curled from moisture. But the writing was clear enough to read. The first page carried an Army letterhead from the early 1950s. The report mentioned unidentified predator activity in the same training sector we had just crossed. The description matched our night. Strange howls, broken deer left uneaten, disrupted radio signals. A second paper noted that a National Guard night exercise had ended early after unusual calls, and one missing sergeant. No further action recorded, just a short line saying the case was closed. I kept turning pages. One handwritten note caught my eye. Someone had written, "Locals call it the howler, command calls it a training hazard." Another page carried a short typed line, "Recommend continued monitoring of valley due to unknown wildlife pattern." Then I found the page that changed the way I looked at the relay shack. It described a test from several years back. Acoustic behavior mapping, it said. Relay station used to broadcast recorded calls during night cycle. The memo claimed the goal was to study how sound traveled through the hollow, but the next line told me more than they meant to share. Responses detected at irregular intervals. Possible wildlife agitation. I set the papers down and looked at the others. The relay shack had not been only a comms checkpoint. It had been part of a test. Someone had used it to play sounds into the hollow at night. They knew something out here listened. Outside the cabin, the wind shifted, carrying a low tone through the trees. Not a full howl, just enough to remind us the hollow was never far behind. I stepped out onto the tower platform with the packet of papers in my hand. The land spread out below, dark lines of ridges folding into the distance. Somewhere down there, Briggs had been taken. Price too. And now I knew this was not the first time men had gone missing. The truth settled on me like cold weight. Our team had not been the first to run into that thing, and from the way the reports ended, none of the earlier teams had walked away with answers. Only silence and excuses in the paperwork. The howl rose again, far off but clear enough to reach the tower. The sound carried a steady shape, almost like a voice that did not come from a human throat. It drifted along the ridge and faded beyond the trees. Standing there, with those old papers in my hand, I understood something important. Whoever planned this exercise had sent us into a place where men had vanished before, and they had done it without telling us why. Night settled over the ridge before any of us were ready. The tower felt strong under our boots, but the woods around it stayed too quiet. We placed each man on a short rotation, wanting to keep alert without wearing anyone out. Henson stayed close to the radio with Cole, trying to follow the book even when the book no longer fit the ground we stood on. Cole called our next scheduled check. The reply came back broken, scattered with static. He shifted the antenna angle, tapped the handset, tried again. A faint voice reached us for a moment, then something else slipped under it. A soft breath. Slow, heavy, like a large chest drawing air too close to the line. Cole froze. The static rose again, carrying a low rumble, not words, not normal interference. It vibrated through the metal frame of the tower in a way that felt wrong. Then, for the space of a heartbeat, the pattern of the howl from the hollow bled into the radio, short and distant but clear enough for each man to look at the others with the same question in his eyes. We pulled back from the railing and watched the dark. Minutes passed in stillness. Then heavy steps moved around the base of the tower. Not running, not rushing, just slow circles. Each footfall pressed into the ground with weight that bent the earth. A scrape followed along the supports, metal ringing soft under pressure. The thing was testing the tower the way it had tested the shack, feeling it, learning it. A thrown branch hit the legs, sending a small shake through the platform. Not enough to knock anyone down, just enough to show it could. The smell drifted up soon after. Wet stone. Sour musk. A faint burn note that did not match any campfire or weapon. Price whispered something under his breath, even though I could tell he was trying not to speak at all. We kept our rifles ready but did not fire. Shooting in the dark at a shape we could not see clearly would only waste rounds. Mac watched the slope with steady eyes, his jaw tight. Briggs had carried the bar. Without him, the loss felt heavier during each movement in the shadows. Later in the night, Price said he needed to step down the ladder to relieve himself. His voice cracked a little, more from fear than urgency. Henson told him to wait, but Price already felt ashamed of losing control. He moved toward the ladder before anyone could stop him. I reached out to pull him back, but he was already halfway down. His boots clinked on the metal steps. I leaned over the rail with my rifle ready. The darkness under the tower felt thicker than before, like the shadows held shape. Price reached the middle of the ladder. For a moment, he looked steady. Then something moved at the edge of the red light. A long arm, dark and heavy with thick fur, flashed in. Not fast like a strike, fast like a sudden grab. Hooked claws caught Price by the jacket and yanked him sideways off the ladder. His scream came out short, cut off before it rose into fear. The sound of him hitting the ground was lost under the layered howl that rose from the base of the tower. It climbed through the trees, shaking the air with each bend of the tone. We fired down, but the bullets sparked off stone and hit nothing solid. Whatever had taken him moved back into the trees, staying close enough for us to hear brush shift but not close enough to see. The smell stayed in the air long after the steps faded. When the woods grew still again, we stood quietly on the platform, each man counting what we had lost. 2 men gone, ammunition low. Fear rising at the edges of every thought. And one truth growing clearer: the thing out there was not hunting by chance. It was testing us the same way it had tested others long before we ever stepped into those hills. Dawn reached the tower like a thin line of pale light, slow and weak. None of us had slept. The metal frame under our boots felt colder than the air. Price's empty place stayed on my mind as we packed our gear. We worked quiet, each man moving with the weight of what the night had taken from us. Henson wanted to stay until the scheduled extraction time, but the tower no longer felt like safety. It felt like a place we had survived only because the thing below had not tried harder. I told him the truth. If we stayed, we would give the creature the advantage again. The hollow was its ground, not ours. After a long pause, he nodded. His ankle was swollen from the climb the day before, but he still stood with his pack on, ready to move. We left the tower in a slow line, rifles up, eyes sweeping every gap between trees. The ridge had a narrow trail that sloped down toward an old logging road. If we followed that road, we could reach the extraction hill by the next morning. That was the plan we held on to. The woods around us stayed tight. Whatever wind had touched the trees during the night faded with the sunrise. The air grew still again, the same way it had before Briggs vanished. We walked ridge to ridge with steady spacing, careful steps, and quiet breathing. Not long after leaving the tower, Henson slipped on loose rock and twisted his ankle deeper. He clenched his teeth and waved off help, but his pace slowed. The team's pace became his. Mac took point while I stayed close to Henson, keeping him upright when the trail dipped. Cole kept glancing behind us, one hand on the radio, unsure if anyone or anything followed. By late morning, we reached a saddle between two ridges. The ground narrowed there, with steep drops on both sides. The sky above looked dull, the kind of gray that steals depth from the land. We crossed single file. Mac stepped ahead, scanning the far slope. That was when the ridge above us groaned. A sharp crack echoed across the saddle. I looked up just in time to see loose rock break free from the slope. The slide rolled toward us faster than we could react. Mac leapt aside. Henson fell backward. I grabbed him by the pack and pulled with everything I had. Stones crashed across the trail in a wide spray. One rock hit the butt of my rifle and spun off into the drop. When the dust settled, no one lay under the slide, but the message was clear. That rockfall had not been chance. The stones came loose in a line, the way they would if something heavy had pushed them from above. We regrouped on the far side of the saddle. Henson's ankle looked worse. His face had gone pale. He said he could move, and he did, but each step brought a quiet grunt he could not hide. We slowed again, ridge to ridge, weaker than we had started. A stretch of thick trees led us down to the old logging road. The path had once carried trucks, but years of weather had erased most of it. Leaves filled the old ruts. Saplings grew where wheels once passed. Still, it was the clearest route we had. It led north, downhill for a short distance, then curled toward the extraction hill. We stepped onto the road just as a low sound rose from the hollow below. Not the full howl, more like a call being held back. A warning or a reminder. The tone carried along the trees and bent in odd ways. Cole tightened his grip on the handset. Mac raised his rifle and scanned the brush. We stayed tight along the road, moving at a pace Henson could manage. Twice I saw shapes shift between trees on the lower slope. Not clear shapes, just movement. I knew the creature was following, staying close but not close enough to draw fire. The road bent around a large outcrop of stone. The face of the rock gave us a shoulder-high place to set a defensive line if we needed it. With the day running short and Henson's ankle slowing us, we made the decision to stop there for the night. The ground held enough height for a small advantage. The rock wall gave cover and a place for Briggs's old BAR, now carried by Mac. None of us wanted to stay still, but moving in the dark through that part of the woods would lose us faster than anything else. The land down there swallowed direction as soon as the light left the trees. We dug shallow fighting positions along the rock, clearing leaves and setting small lanes of fire. The work kept our hands busy, which helped push back the fear for a short while. Cole set the radio against the stone, hoping the height would help the signal. Henson tried to hide the pain in his ankle but did not speak much anymore. He looked smaller than he had the day before, worn down by choices no officer school prepared him for. As the sun dropped behind the ridges, the woods darkened in fast steps. Each moment the light thinned, the quiet deepened. I checked my rifle again. Mac loaded the BAR with slow, steady hands. Cole tested the handset and got a faint reply, broken but alive enough for him to send a short message asking for urgent extraction at dawn. When full dark came, the land around us fell silent again. Not like a normal night. This silence felt shaped. like something had wiped the sound clean so it could listen better. We waited behind the rock, watching the tree line, knowing the creature would come soon. We had one advantage now: open ground in front of us and clear lines of fire. It was not much, but it was more than we had the night before. The first flicker of movement appeared at the edge of the brush, too quick to see clearly. Then everything went still. The next moment would decide if any of us reached the extraction hill alive. Night settled fast over the logging road. The darkness reached the tree line first, then slid across the open ground until only our small corner near the rock held any shape. We stayed low behind the stone, rifles ready, eyes fixed on the shadows ahead. Every breath felt louder than it should. Every heartbeat felt like a step on loose gravel. Cole finished sending his short message for dawn extraction. The reply came weak, but enough to tell us someone heard. After that, the radio hissed until he shut it off to save the battery. Henson leaned against the rock beside me, breathing slow and sharp, his ankle swollen and stiff. Mac sat up front with the bar rested on a flat edge of stone. His hands stayed steady, even after everything the hollow had taken from us. The first sign came when one of our trip flares snapped open. A burst of white light filled the brush, sharp and clean. For a second, we saw nothing. Then the shape moved into view. The creature stepped into the open with heavy, sure steps. Its shoulders were broad, rising high above a man's height. Thick, dark fur covered its body. Two short horn-like points rose from its head, almost hidden by the hair. Its arms hung long, ending in heavy hands tipped with curved claws. The eyes caught the flare light and glowed with a dull, unnatural shine. The jaw looked wrong, stretched a little too far back, like it had more strength than any known animal. It stood there staring at us, as if measuring the distance. Then the flare burned out, and the world fell dark again. "Hold," I whispered, though the others already knew. The next few seconds stretched. Leaves shifted in a soft circle, as if something moved around the edges of our position. Then a second howl rose from far back in the trees. This one was lower, slower, carrying a deep tone that seemed to roll under the ground itself. I could not tell if it came from another creature or from the same one changing its pitch. But the sound made the hair on my neck tighten. Mac tightened his grip on the BAR. Cole's breathing sped up, and he wiped his palms on his trousers. Then the creature moved. It charged from the right, low to the ground, fast in a way that did not match its size. Branches snapped. Brush tore open. Mac fired the first burst. The BAR roared, muzzle climbing as brass scattered across the rock. The rounds hit the shape, some striking shoulder, some hitting the side, flashing small sparks where bone or stone hid under fur. The creature rolled behind a thick cedar trunk, using the land like it understood every inch of it. Cole fired 2 shots from his Durand, the sound sharp in the night. The creature slipped into cover again, never staying in one place long enough to give us a clean target. Then the second howl came again, closer this time. Or maybe it only felt closer. Fear has a way of pulling distance in both directions. A sudden movement flashed at the front of our position. Cole turned with his rifle raised, but he reacted a half-second too late. The creature lunged from the brush and grabbed him by the shoulder strap of his pack. He shouted, reaching out, but the pull was too strong. His feet left the ground. He was dragged almost into the trees before any of us could fire. I jumped forward and fired at the shadow pulling him, but the creature shifted away with unnatural speed. Cole's cry faded into the dark. Then the layered howl rose again, this time mixed with a faint crack of brush under heavy steps. Henson closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and steadied his rifle. He said nothing. None of us did. We had no choice but to hold the line. Not long after Cole vanished, the creature circled again. I heard stones shift uphill. Mac pointed the BAR toward that sound. A shadow moved behind a thin cedar. Mac fired a tight burst, the rounds cracking through the branches. A heavy growl answered, followed by a stumble. The shape moved awkwardly, dragging one leg for a moment. We had heard it. I motioned for the others to stay low. The creature slipped back into the trees but did not go far. Its breaths carried on the wind like short waves. Then its shape darted left, using the brush as cover. The land seemed to bend around it, giving it paths we could not see. Close to dawn, the sky gained a faint gray line. That was when it made its last push. The creature charged from the left flank, bursting through cedar scrub. Mac stepped into its path without fear, firing at almost arm's length. The BAR clattered empty just as the creature struck him. He went down hard, the claws raking across his shoulder and ribs. He cried out, trying to push it off. I moved without thinking, running toward them, firing my rifle until the clip pinged empty. The round struck its chest and face, but it kept its hold on Mac. I dropped the rifle, drew my sidearm, and fired at its head. One shot, then another, then another. On the fourth shot, the creature jerked. Its grip loosened. Its breath came out in a long, low groan. It sagged forward, heavy fur brushing the ground. The smell of wet stone and musk filled the air, stronger than before. I fired again to be sure. The creature's body slumped to the earth, chest rising once, then going still. None of us moved for a moment. Henson limped toward us, rifle ready. Mac lay on his back, breath shallow, blood spreading across his shirt. He looked at me with dull eyes but managed a faint nod. He was alive, but barely. We did not approach the creature closely. The shape of it in the half-light was enough. Instead, I took a grenade from my belt, pulled the pin, and rolled it near the body. The blast brought dirt, branches, and dust down over it. When the smoke cleared, the creature lay buried under fallen limbs and scattered rock. The first true morning light crept over the ridge. We had nothing left but a few rifle rounds, one weak radio battery, and 3 men still standing. We lifted Mac between us, Henson on one side, me on the other, and began the slow walk toward the extraction hill. Each ridge-to-ridge stretch felt longer than the last. The creature did not follow, but the hollow behind us stayed quiet in a way that made me wonder if silence itself was watching. By the time the helicopter reached the clearing, we were more shadows than soldiers. The crew looked down at us with wide eyes. As they raised us into the cabin, I glanced once toward the trees below. A dark shape shifted far down near the place where we left the creature. It moved only a little, but it moved. The helicopter lifted us out of the hills with a sharp rise that made my stomach turn. Cold air pushed through the open door, carrying the smell of pine and dust. I held Mac against the seat while the medic pressed bandages to his shoulder and ribs. His face looked drained, but he kept his eyes open, watching the trees fall away beneath us. Henson sat on the other side, clutching his ankle and staring at nothing. The morning light showed every line of fear we had carried since stepping into that hollow. When we reached the post, a string of officers and medical staff waited. They pulled Mac into a stretcher and rolled him inside. Henson followed with the medic's help. I walked under my own weight, but each step felt heavier than any pack I had ever carried. The quiet in my head felt wrong after so many nights listening for movement in the dark. They put us in separate rooms in the hospital ward. Doctors cleaned cuts, checked bruises, and asked questions that did not match what we had lived through. They wanted times, distances, number of rounds fired, and the exact moment radio contact faded. They did not ask about the creature. Maybe they were told not to. A day later, 2 plainclothes men arrived. Not officers, not local police. They wore simple suits and spoke with calm, steady voices. They interviewed us one at a time in a small room beside the ward. They asked about the terrain, the relay shack, the tower, and the rock slide. When they asked about the animal, they wrote down "bear" before I finished the first sentence. I tried to explain the height, the shape, the way it moved, the smell that came before it. One of the men nodded politely, then wrote, "large predator, likely cougar." I drew the creature as best I could. He looked at the drawing for only a moment before sliding it under his folder. When I asked about Briggs and Price, they gave me the official version. Briggs was listed as missing after a fall during training. Price was marked as killed by an accidental drop from the fire tower stairs. Cole's case was recorded as confusion during darkness and movement, cause uncertain. They said these things happen in difficult terrain. I looked at their eyes while they spoke. They did not believe the words any more than I did. But those were the words they were told to use. After the interviews, a captain came to my bedside with papers to sign. He explained that the training area would be marked as unsafe due to rock slide risk and unstable ground. No mention of anything alive down there. No mention of the sound that carried through the forest like something thinking its way through the trees. He asked if I understood. I signed because arguing would not bring anyone back. Max stayed in the hospital for several days. The surgeons fixed what they could. They said he might lose use of his left arm for good. When I visited him, he gave a faint smile and said he still remembered the creature's breath on his neck. He said it without fear, more like a man remembering heat from a fire he survived by inches. Henson was moved to a quiet office job after he left the ward. I saw him once before he transferred. He looked older, not by years, but by the kind of weight that does not leave a man's shoulders. He nodded at me, and I nodded back. Nothing more needed saying. As for me, they cleared me for duty after a week. My injuries were light, my thoughts were not. I walked out of the hospital and looked toward the hills. They sat calm and green under the autumn sun. No sound reached me from them. No sign of what we had faced. The land hid its secrets well. The official files closed the matter with clean lines. But the truth stayed open in my memory, sharp as the smell of wet stone that drifted in before each attack. They asked us to leave it behind. They wanted to call it something simple. But a man does not forget the shape of what watched him from the trees. The platoon felt different when I returned. Faces looked the same, but the way men stood near the map tables or checked their gear showed they sensed something had happened that did not fit any training story. They asked quiet questions about Briggs, Price, and Cole, but no one pressed hard. Soldiers learn early when not to push. Word spreads in ways you cannot stop, even without details. Within a week, new orders came down. Our recon platoon was split and shifted. Some men were sent to other companies. Others were placed on desk duty for a while. Henson left sooner than expected, moved into a staff role far from the field. I think the hills had taken more from him than his ankle. He had been a by-the-book officer, but the hollow force choices no man learns in school. The weight of those choices stayed on him. Max stayed on base for a short time, but everyone knew he would not return to field work. His arm regained some movement, but not enough for a rifle. When he came to say goodbye, he stood with the same calm he carried on patrol. He told me he would head home and find steady work, somewhere quiet. I nodded. He deserved peace more than anyone I knew then. A senior sergeant pulled me aside a few days later. He had served long before I came in. He spoke low, just enough for me to hear. He said he once heard about a National Guard patrol that vanished in those same hills years ago. The file had vanished too, replaced with a short line about storms and poor footing. He said the land in that valley had stories older than the uniform on our backs. Then he walked away, leaving the thought sitting in my mind like a stone. I checked the new maps in the operations room. A wide oval now covered Devil's Fork Hollow. The words, "No training authorized," were stamped across it in clean black ink. Another line sat near the edge of the mark. Acoustic test concluded. That told me the project was not forgotten. Only paused. Maybe stopped on paper, but not in practice. I wondered if someone would return there one day with new gear and a different plan. The kind of plan that sends men into places without telling them everything. Weeks passed. Leaves turned and fell. News from outside the post trickled in. One clipping mentioned livestock found torn open on private property near the training boundary. Locals blamed coyotes or stray dogs. The article listed animals that did not match any known tracks. A few days later, someone else mentioned a strange low sound picked up on a radio frequency used for test drills at night. No one linked it to anything. They just laughed or shrugged, but I felt the hair rise on my arms when I heard it. Cole was never found. Briggs either. Search teams walked the ridges for days, but the report stopped early. The land down there was too tangled, too steep, too quiet. When the search ended, the men folded their maps and left the valley the way we did, carrying unanswered questions in their eyes. The Army moved on. It always does. New missions replaced old ones. New officers arrived. Training shifted toward other hills, other ranges. But Devil's Fork Hollow stayed blocked off, a silent place on the map where no one wanted to send young soldiers again. For me, the memory did not fade. Not the smell that drifted in before each attack. Not the layered howl that bent through the ridges. Not the sense that the land shaped our path without us knowing. I carried those things with me every time I walked near thick woods. Some nights, lying awake in the barracks, I wondered if killing that creature had ended something or opened something else. I never found an answer. But I learned one truth. The hills keep their own record. Not in paper. Not in reports. In sound and shadow and the things that move when the forest grows still. And the hollow, whatever lived in it before us, had not been empty when we arrived. It was not empty when we left. I grew older, moved to new assignments, and lived through other long nights in different places, but none stayed with me the way those Ozark Hills did. War shapes a man, but war has rules. You know what shoots at you. You know the sound of rifles and the direction danger comes from. Even fear has a rhythm you can understand. The hollow was different. It watched us without showing itself. It pushed us ridge to ridge, slowing us when it wanted and driving us forward when it chose. I did not understand that at the time. I only felt it, the way a man feels cold before he sees the frost. Some things live in the land long before uniforms walk through it. For years after, I stayed away from the deeper woods. I walked near tree lines but rarely stepped far inside. When I did, I found myself listening for a sound that should not exist. That layered howl, low at the start, sharp at the end, almost shaped like a voice, but not a human one. Sometimes I caught myself pausing at the smell of wet stone on warm air. It was never strong, never enough to be real, but enough to pull a memory forward before I pushed it back again. When men asked what happened on that patrol, I told the version they were allowed to hear. Accidents, poor footing, weather. A simple story that stayed inside the bounds of what people accept. It is easier for most to believe a cougar attacked us. Easier for command too, creatures they understand. Patterns they can explain. But I was there, and I know what I saw. If anyone finds themselves walking those hills one day, far from roads and voices, and they hear a howl that bends through the ridges in a way no normal animal can manage, I hope they pay attention. The land gives warnings if you know how to listen. And if that smell of wet stone drifts in before the sound, do yourself a favor. Leave the ridge to whatever lived there long before we set foot on it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And for more amazing horror stories, just click the ones showing right now on your screen.